everyone. We're going to get started here at 6 o'clock. My name is Kamala Weedy, and I'm the marketing coordinator for Clet World Languages. And I would just like to welcome you all and thank you all for coming. We do these for you to offer you these professional development opportunities. And so we are so excited that you're here tonight. And we are very excited to introduce our speaker for the night. Here's Christy. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. As Kamala said, I'm Christy O'Connor. I am a Spanish program consultant here at Clet World Languages, as well as a marketing coordinator. I'm so excited to have all of you here tonight. As a former teacher myself, I know how valuable your free time is, and spending it here with us means the world. I want to tell you a little bit about our presenter, Florencia. Florencia Henshaw has a PhD in second language acquisition and teacher education from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where she is now the director of advanced Spanish. She is an award-winning educator who has published and presented nationally and internationally on technology integration and research-based pedagogical practices. In her YouTube channel and podcast, Unpacking Language Pedagogy, she summarizes and discusses research articles, activities, terms, and various topics related to language teaching. Her co-authored book, Common Ground, Second Language Acquisition Theory Goes to the Classroom, aims to help educators visualize how to put principles into action. Dr. Henshaw is also a certified actual oral proficiency interview tester and an AP Spanish language and culture reader, an Apple Rater, the author of 2 Spanish textbooks, an editorial board member of FLTMAG, an online magazine on technology integration in language teaching and learning, and a member of the board of directors of the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese. So please do me all a favor and give a warm welcome to our amazing presenter, Florencia. Welcome, Florencia.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the nice introduction. It's so nice to see so many names. I keep scrolling and recognizing so many names. So thank you all for being here, especially after such a challenging school year, academic year. We are drained. So I feel extra flattered that you're here. I hope I won't disappoint. So the first thing I'll do, oh, Teresa, oh my God, I'm sorry. I see names that I haven't seen in a while. Okay, so the first thing that I'll do is I'll share a link with you. I'm gonna do what you're not supposed to do, you know, which is to share handouts with students before you start, because then everybody gets distracted, but I'm gonna do it. So what I'll do is in that link to that Google Doc, you'll see a few links, just so that if you're wondering, where am I going to see the slides? Where will be the recording? Or where can I get a copy of her book and things like that? It's all there. The links are there. So you can check that out later. I'll see if I can share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, everybody can hear me, see me, everything okay? Everything's working okay? Yes, perfect. All right, so let's get started with unpacking output. And I went with why, when, and how, although all of that is probably going to be mixed in today's presentation. So first, we're going to discuss a little bit of the bigger picture. So output and input, not output versus input. Then we need to spend a little bit of time discussing what output is, or at least what I mean by output, so that everything makes sense. And then the when and the how is probably going to be addressed at the same time. And by that, I mean the difference between pushed versus shoved versus scaffolded. And it will all make sense in just a minute. So let's start with the big picture. Today, as you know, the focus is output, and I only have an hour. I don't mean to say anything wrong about input. This is not an anti-input session. So just because we're talking about output, that doesn't mean that we are diminishing the importance of input. And I chose this picture for a number of reasons. First, because it's funny, but also because, as you can tell, I'm highlighting the 3 modes of communication. If you are here in the US and you are familiar with ACTFL, then you probably are familiar with the three modes of communication: interpretive, presentational, and interpersonal. Today, since we're talking about output, I'm focusing on the modes that involve output: presentational and interpersonal. That is not to say, once again, that interpretive is less important or not important. I'm not comparing them. And that's why I said at the beginning, not versus, but and. And also, this picture reflects my current abilities in Italian, but beyond that, it reflects a lot of what our students can do, right? Where the interpretive mode seems to come a little bit easier, so to speak. Presentational, they can handle it with some rehearsing. And then when it comes to interpersonal, it feels like there's like a salad in our heads and then we don't remember anything, right? And then we try the best we can. But in terms of expectations, right, what we're expecting out of interpretive and then what we're expecting out of the other two modes has to be different. So when we talk about bigger picture language development, which is hopefully your goal or one of your goals in your classes, then what is the one thing that we all agree on? If there's no input, there's no way they could be output, right? So no input, no output. We all agree on that. Now, what role does output really play, right? And then why do we see that in textbooks, especially, but even in classes, and I've been guilty of that, we favor output over input. So we spend more time perhaps having students produce language than understanding language. So if we say that input is so necessary and so important because without input there's no output, why do we see that in materials we favor output over input? And I think it's important for us to reflect on this. This is not an anti-input, it's not an anti-output thing. This is just for us to reflect on why we do certain things. And sometimes we don't notice we're doing certain things. So I have several reasons here, but feel free to add your own in the chat. So one of them, the one we just saw, right, that two of the three modes involves output. So even if you're doing the three modes of communication right there, there's only one that is really input and the other ones tend to favor output. As we also saw in that picture, output is more difficult. So always comprehension precedes production. And so we feel that our learners need more practice. So they need more opportunities to produce. The third reason is that output or language production, speaking, writing, signing, tends to be perceived as something active, whereas comprehension, reading something, listening to something, viewing something, tends to be perceived as something passive. And when we think of good qualities of teaching, most of us associate active with good, right? And so it could be that we favor output because it feels more active and it feels like better teaching. Output tends to be student-centered. The student is producing something, written, oral, speaking to somebody, presenting something is very student-centered. Input, on the other hand, is true that tends to be a little bit more teacher-centered. We are the ones giving them the resources. We are the ones giving them the input. So it could be that, again, psychologically, maybe subconsciously, we tend to think that, oh, I want to be student-centered, so let's get the students to be more active and more in charge, and here comes output. And sadly, I would say, the perception out there is when you think of communication, the first thing people think about is expression of something, expressing ideas. Even when our learners, like if you ask them, what would you like? Why are you learning Spanish? Why are you learning French, Korean, etc.? Many of them say, because I want to talk, with people because I want to have a conversation with people, right? So even communication, we tend to think of it as production, expression, right? So it's output much more than understanding. But we do have to remember that comprehension is also communication. Anecdotally, I just want to tell you something really short. I was looking at ACFL's proficiency guidelines specific for Spanish. They have it specific for each language. And I noticed that the writing guidelines are called comunicación escrita, which is written communication. But the reading guidelines just say reading. And I was like, that's interesting. Written communication equals writing. So there it goes. It tells you that we have come to accept that communication means expressing. Another possibility, a lot of the can do related to being active, relating to the 3 modes. Can do tends to be associated with what you can say, right? So again, output over input. And the last reason that I could think of, there could be many more. The last reason I can think of is that output tends to be a tangible outcome, the fruit of our labor, right? Input perhaps is seen a little bit more as the scaffolding, the part of the process, but then here comes output where you can measure it, where you can quantify it, where you can say, oh, you were able to do this, right? Where perhaps for assessment purposes, we tend to go a little bit more towards the output. I'm not saying everybody, I'm not saying that's all we do, but do we tend to favor output over input in our teaching? That's just something to reflect on. I didn't put it here, but I do have another theory, which is that input activities are much harder to create than output activities. And why do I say that is because, and I see it in a lot of textbooks, right? It's a lot easier to just write the instructions to say, hey, students, talk about this now. Here are some questions you can discuss. I'm done. But having to create a good text that I know is going to be comprehensible for them, creating good pre-reading, post-reading questions, it takes some skill, right? It takes some mental effort. So it could be that we also favor output, perhaps, because in a lot of textbooks, it's a lot easier to create output activities than input activities. Okay. So what happened with this? And this is, again, it's just my take on it. I'm not saying this is facts, but I feel that this favoring output over input so much in many of our materials in how we tend to teach has led to a pendulum swing to go to the other extreme of perhaps a misunderstanding of the roles of input and output and an overzealous defense of input, which I understand input is necessary. So you want to defend it and send your message loud and clear that input is necessary. I get it. We get it. The sad byproduct of that for me is that now output is being seen as like the arch enemy of input, and people are choosing teams. You're either team Krashen or you're either team Swain. I'm not either. I don't think you need to pick teams. Output is not the arch enemy of input. We just need to think about what roles that they play, and especially for the proficiency level of our students, what makes the most sense. I prefer to see input and output as having more of a symbiotic relationship. I think that many times it's almost difficult to fully separate them or fully keep them apart from each other. The easiest way to see that is that someone's output is someone else's input, right? So the students could write something that another student reads, for example. When the students are given a presentation, that's input for the other students, right? Output could also help strengthen form meaning connections. So if we think of acquisition as building a linguistic system in your head, and you are in the camp that believes that it's totally implicit and that you do that only from the input, what you're doing is making these form meaning connections. Yes, the vocab, obviously this word means this, but even the grammar, like the little s at the end of connections, is telling me more than one, it's telling me plural, right? So that form is conveying a certain meaning. And yes, we need to get that data from the input. Where else are we going to get it, right? We get it from the input, and we get it by understanding input. That's why we make form meaning connections. But then I've had conversations about this on Twitter already. How do we know exactly when building means getting that data versus strengthening those connections? And that's where I go, do we really, want to get that deep into it? Maybe not. So I can see that, yes, if for you building the system also implies strengthening those connections, then sure, output could contribute to that. Even BVP, defender of input, does say that output may help learners be better processors of input. And that is tied to one thing that Swains said back in the 80s when she proposed the output hypothesis. And some of the benefits of output in Swains' hypothesis are tied to input. And what do I mean by that? So let's review Swains' output hypothesis. If you are already familiar with it, this will be a very quick review. So what she essentially said in response to what Krashen was saying in the 80s is that input is necessary, but not enough. And this is where we go back to the necessary but sufficient, necessary and sufficient, necessary but not sufficient. So Swain said not sufficient. It is necessary, and nobody's disputing that it's necessary. But Swain said output does play a role. The three functions that she outlined were realizing what you may not know yet. So when you're trying to express meaning, you realize, oops, I don't know if that's right, or oops, I don't remember the word for this. Hypothesis testing, which means you try to convey meaning to the best of your abilities, and you realize based on your audience's reaction or whether the message was correctly conveyed or not, whether you were successful or not, and you try things out. Metalinguistic reflection is the third one, and this is the one where we can put a little question mark here, and we can debate how helpful metalinguistic reflection is or is not. And what she meant by it is that when you're producing language, especially in writing, I would say, but even if you're speaking, you may sort of stop to monitor your production and reflect on it, right? And think, wait, no, that's a different word, right? That's not what I mean to say. And then so those little metalinguistic reflections are, oh, wait, no, I think that needs to be plural. That's what she means by metalinguistic reflection. Now, are these connected to input? To some extent, I would argue, yes, they are. I have to clarify, so she does admit that just output by itself, it's not going to get you all that far, meaning that if you just talk to a wall the entire time, okay, it's not going to do a whole lot. And that's why it got revised in 2000. But she does, the essential thing she wanted to convey is that output may trigger certain cognitive processes, see, I have to monitor my production, certain cognitive processes that may help to strengthen those for meaning connections. So that may prompt you to pay more attention to the input in the future. Better processors of input, as Van Patten said. So the reason why I say that many of these functions are connected back to input, and that is why they have a symbiotic relationship. It's not about one or the other. Is it useful to realize that you don't know something only to continue not knowing? When you realize that you don't know this word, and you don't realize, when you realize that you're not quite sure if that's the right way to say it or not, don't you want input to sort of confirm if that was right or not? Or don't you want input to then tell you what the word was, the thing that you were missing? Same with hypothesis testing. How useful is that if you never get confirmation? You're testing the hypothesis, but there's nothing back. And notice that it doesn't have to be another speaker. It could be, she said, and I didn't include the quote, but in her original, she said, it could be that they turn to a dictionary, they turn to another source, and that source is input, right? Or she even said they make a mental note to pay attention to future input. Again, we go back to input. And this is partly why it got revised in 2000, and it was expanded a little bit more and focusing more towards collaborative dialogue. So these instances where learners are trying to resolve linguistic dilemmas and how they help each other out. And that was very much influenced by Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, right? That what you do by yourself and what you do with the help of the scaffolding of others, right? Of other resources. Related to that is Long's interaction hypothesis from the 90s. And in the interaction hypothesis, here's where we have the clearest connection between input and output, right? And so what Long posited was that interaction connects input and output in meaningful ways. That is actually a quote from the original interaction hypothesis. And I think that that is a very powerful thing, in meaningful ways. And this is why I'm going to keep coming back to meaning, meaning, meaning. The original interaction hypothesis, and as far as I know, he didn't necessarily revise it, although with the years, it got morphed into the interaction approach. I don't think it was Long's idea, but that's what it morphed into. But the original interaction hypothesis was about the benefits of interacting with a more knowledgeable interlocutor. He was very specific about that. And this is what prompted a lot of studies, including my dissertation, to focus on learner-learner interaction. What happens when two learners interact with each other? So there's not necessarily a one more clearly more knowledgeable interlocutor. And it shows that the learners are still involved in collaborative dialogue. They're still involving in focus on form-focused episodes or language-related episodes. So they're still learning from each other and their language is still developing. But the reason why I would say that Long specifically said more knowledgeable interlocutor is because you need that input from somebody else, right? To help you confirm your hypothesis, to help you figure out how to say something, right? To help you stretch your interlanguage. So again, we keep connecting input and output. If we want to think of what about just output by itself, like just the act of producing language, to me, the best, simplest way of putting it was Keaton, 2016, who said, output hones a learner's ability to access the implicit system with accuracy and speed. So you notice there, I put the bold ability to access. So the emphasis here is a little bit more on accessing the system with increasingly greater accuracy and speed, as opposed to the building the system, which is the main function of input, if you will. I also like this quote because of that word hones a learner's ability to access the system. And that is connected to another term that Swain is famous for, but it got a little bit misunderstood or misinterpreted over the years, and that is pushed output. And we sent a survey before the webinar asking you if you thought pushed output was more harmful than helpful. And I just saw the results before logging in today. And I'm not kidding you, we are split 50-50. So we definitely need to talk about pushed output. So pushed output, let's start by the misunderstandings, right? So pushed output was not supposed to be about perfection from day one or pushing learners to start talking on day one. Pushed output was supposed to refer to this honing, stretching, developing their skill. So Krashen, as you know, is famous for the I+1. So if you will, this is a little bit of the O+1, and a bit beyond is actually Krashen's actual description of I+1, which I always find a little bit comical, but that is how he described +1 is a bit beyond. You interpret that as you think is best. So the same we can say for output, right? That is a bit beyond, meaning that we want them to sort of stretch their skills, not to the point of tearing a ligament, but we want them to slowly be pushing them to maybe say a little more, or maybe express themselves a little bit more accurately. And also pushed output was not supposed to be PPP, which is presentation, production, practice. That is not what Swain meant by pushed output. I think that's how it got misinterpreted, and that's why it probably got such a bad rep, but that is not what she meant by it. What I would say, and we're going to come back to what is output, right? And we're going to come back to the practice part a little bit more. But at the very least, let's just clarify, that's not what it was meant by pushed output. With all of this being said, I always like to sort of bring it back, right, to what really matters. So don't lose the forest for the trees. If you walk away still not remembering what pushed output is, I'm okay with that. The questions that I want you to at least think about are learners engaging meaningfully and purposefully with the language? And this engaging with language applies to all modes, right? And it could involve both the input and the output. Specifically to output, the question that I would say you should reflect on is, are we providing opportunities for learners to express meaning to the best of their abilities? And that's a little bit of that pushed output, but expressing meaning, not just practicing, not just drilling, but expressing meaning. Are we giving them those opportunities? Okay, so let's talk about output. What I mean by output, and it's connected to the question that I just asked. So as you can tell, I keep coming back to meaning, because to me, when I say output, or if you ask me, is this activity an output activity? What I think is expressing meaning. I don't picture just copying symbols, just copying letters, and I don't picture just repeating sounds. Now, could you tell me, are you saying that that is completely useless and we should never, ever, ever do that? Well, no, parentheses here, I understand. So if a student is not, having trouble pronouncing a particular word, and you want to maybe have them, write a few words that contain that sound and then work on it, I understand, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying don't do that, but am I saying that that's what counts as your output for the day? Not quite. I keep coming back to expressing meaning. So to determine, is this output, does it count as output, as what I mean by output? I guess the two questions we're going to ask are, could it be done without paying attention to meaning? And this is something that I think also goes for input. And the second one is the student retrieving from their linguistic system? And I know novice learners are probably going to need a little bit more help in that retrieval, but still, are they retrieving from their linguistic system? So as an example, choral repetition. Choral repetition would be something I did as a student when I took languages. And so the teacher would say the vocab word, and we were all supposed to repeat the word. And then another vocab word, and we would all repeat the word. Could it be done without paying attention to meaning? Yes. I could just repeat sounds, and I have no idea what I'm saying. And I, as a student, I'm not retrieving from my linguistic system. I'm simply imitating the sounds that you are making. I sing songs in my car in all sorts of languages, including Vietnamese, and I have absolutely no clue what I'm saying, because there's nothing. I have no linguistic system for Vietnamese in my head, but I can imitate all of the sounds and sing, but I don't know what I'm saying. So that's not output. That's not what I mean by output. You don't want to hear me sing in Vietnamese, by the way. My poor dogs have to put up with that. So let's play, is this output? And you have 4 examples for activities, A, B, C, and D. So if you want to put in the chat a yes or no, if you just want to focus on one of them, that's okay. I'm not grading you. If you don't want to answer, you don't have to. So what do you think in terms of A, B, C, or D? Is it output yes or no? And you can start answering in the chat, and I'll just take a quick look at the answers that are coming in. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of yeses for A. Someone said disclaimer, I'm reading common ground. I love that. Okay. I'm seeing a lot of several no's for D. Oh, D no with exclamation points. Okay. I did see some that it was like all output. Okay. No for D, no for D. Okay. I'm seeing some yeses for C. Maybe B. We're a little bit split on B. We got to talk about B. Okay. All of them. All right. Maybe. Okay. Possibly. Love that. Okay. All right. Thank you. You all are awesome. Okay. So in general, A got thumbs up, right? So the student is writing things they did, the classmate in the case, in what order they probably did them. So it's the student, the first student is expressing meaning and is retrieving from their own system, perhaps with some help. Maybe they need to ask the instructor, how do you say this? That's okay. Retrieving, expressing meaning, somebody's doing something, thumbs up for A. B is where we were a little bit split. I saw some maybes, some possibly. And so I guess what happens in B is that we need to know who wrote that story, right? So if one student is simply reading a story that the teacher gave them, here's copies for everybody. You read your story to your partner. That is not output. All I'm doing is reading something out loud. Now, the other student has to pay attention to meaning, to draw it, and I perhaps need to understand the story that my teacher just gave me, so that if my partner has questions, then I can verify if the drawings are correct. But as you can see, I need to understand, my partner needs to understand. That is much more input than output. Right? So it doesn't quite count as output. Now, if the student wrote the story first, okay, the writing of the story then is output. C, I think people were okay with it. I think I also saw a lot of yeses. So the first part is true that they're just reading out loud, but they're reading out loud and they have to understand, because otherwise, how are they going to finish? Right? And at least the second part they're retrieving from their system in order to complete that sentence. So yes, it could count as output. And then D was the one that got a lot of no's. So, but why? It's a shopping list. Isn't that meaningful? It's not. If I'm not understanding, I could probably still write carrots with the S correctly. And maybe in my head, I'm thinking that a carrot is a strawberry, right? But it doesn't matter, because all that matters is for me to add the S. So it could be done without paying attention to meaning, even if you think you're contextualizing it. And so now it's meaningful. Could it be done? The task you're asking them to do, it is just to change it to plural. It could be done without paying attention to meaning. Would you need to know how the language works? What is the rule for forming plurals? Yes, but that doesn't mean that I need to understand what carrot, the word carrot, means, what meaning I am expressing with that word. What about this one? Now we're going to talk about fruits, not vegetables. Is this output? Not really. It's a good answer. Okay, another not really. Okay, I like that. Okay. Reciting, I like that. Not sure, I guess not. Okay, okay. Practicing but not output, no, okay. It's input. You don't like veggies. No, I like veggies just fine. I'm sorry, I went with fruit here. Interpersonal, beginning of interpersonal. Call it practice. Okay, all right. They're not retrieving. Okay, here we go. They're not retrieving anything. It's already listed for them. Yes. I know I put fresas instead of frutilla. It's just I didn't want to get into it. Okay. I have to finish common ground. Yes, that's fine. Okay, so I like a lot of the answers that I'm seeing. Right, so I think that it maybe could have been as like the beginning of like maybe scaffolding, some sort of interpersonal down the line. But here, if you're giving me everything, right, with the translation, with the little picture, there's not a whole lot of retrieving going on. And then on top of that, I probably could do that even if I didn't speak Spanish, because you're giving me the translation. So I'm just going to repeat these words that I see here, right? Or I'm just going to say the word that is next to the picture that I recognize. So we get into this gray area of how much are they paying attention to meaning, and then the issue is that they're not retrieving because everything is given for them. Now, do we need to give them language that they can then retrieve later on? Yes, of course. Yes, yes, yes. I'm not saying this is inherently bad. The question was just, is this output or is this interpersonal? Well, if we say that interpersonal means expressing my own meaning, interpreting my own meaning, then this is a little bit too much on the input side, right? It would be essentially the same as giving them a handout and they just have to check, me gusta mucho, me gusta un poco, and everything is translated. So all they're doing is this, making the connection that this phrase means this, right? But are they retrieving from their own system? Not quite, right? We want to get them there, but it's not quite there yet. Okay. What about a dictogloss? And this was another question that was in the survey, and it got mixed answers, but a lot of you said, yes, it is output. So the way that a dictogloss works is the teacher reads a short paragraph twice or 3 times, depending on the students and the paragraph. The students just listen, try to remember as much as possible, and then the students work in pairs to recreate it word for word. Later on, the teacher displays the text, the students revise it as needed to make sure what they got right, what they need to change. And then later on, they do something with the text. Like, for example, they can illustrate it, give it a title, etc. So is it output? Yes, yes, absolutamente. Okay. Oh, I have a note. Okay. I love that. Not sure. All right. So I like dictoglosses because they're like that borderline, right, between input and output. And the reason why I say that is because most of it, right, is coming from the input, right, what they can remember. But if it's well done, right, a good dictogloss, when the students are recreating that paragraph together, they are retrieving from their system. They start saying things like, no, I think that this word needs to go here, or I think that this one needs to be feminine, and I think that they're using their own linguistic resources. It's not 100% just memorized and regurgitated, if you will. The students are trying to understand the text. They're trying to remember it, but at some point, especially in the middle, they start recreating it as best as they can in what makes sense meaningfully for the rest of that story, right? And sometimes they remember some words, but everything else that is going in between the words, they're retrieving it from their system. But it's true that perhaps the beginning, a lot of them do remember it verbatim just from listening to it. But a lot of what's happening in that middle, in the negotiation to recreate it, is output. But of course, then we have, again, you display the text and then they're just sort of like doing this comparison, right, between what they thought it was and what it actually is. You could say maybe there's some hypothesis testing going on there. So yes, and Swain actually used dictoglosses a lot in her research. So some common objections that I typically get when I say things like what I just said. The first objection that I get is, even if it's a meaningless drill, right? Even if you don't have, like the one with the carrots, right? You just have to write the plural. Some students might still pay some attention to meaning. That's objection one. And objection two is, what about pronunciation or handwriting practice, right? All you want to do is to practice pronouncing words or practice writing words. And my answers, perhaps exasperating, are, so the first one is that I want students to develop communicative ability thanks to my approach and not in spite of my approach. So just saying that, well, some students might pay attention to meaning, like if I'm lucky, why not just create the conditions so everybody is paying attention to meaning? That would be my first response to the first one. And then the second one, I get it. I understand that sometimes you want to practice pronouncing something or that handwriting is important in language. I get it, and I'm not diminishing it. All I'm asking is, why not include meaning when you're doing those kinds of things intentionally and purposefully in every activity? So what if instead of just repeating a word like choral repetition, could we have learners maybe say the word that goes with the picture? At least there's some meaning involved there. Instead of just copying words, what if the learner has to label pictures, right? So we're still producing the language that the characters you want them to write, but at least there's some connection to meaning, right? So that we're not divorcing meaning from the language. I am a big fan of form and meaning, not one or the other. And when you think about it, form is always there. You cannot have meaning without form, but you can have form without meaning. So that means that form always has an advantage. The form is always there. I want to give meaning a chance. And careful if you're going to the extreme with a pendulum swing to say I'm not anti-grammar. I am not. I am just pro-meaning. I want to give meaning a chance to be included in the party. So it's not always a party about form. And it kind of goes back to my goals and priorities, which you may share or you may not. And I respect if you do not share my goals and priorities. So the first one is proficiency over perfection. To me, if the student is trying to communicate something, what they're communicating with me to develop those skills to express meaning, since we're talking about output, but of course to understand as well, is much more important than if they said it perfectly, right? So instead of me noticing the errors that they're making, how about I notice what they're trying to tell me? Meaning making over mastering, right? So instead of drilling, so they perfect one form, I'm a little bit more interested in what they want to tell me, right? On the meaning that they're trying to express. So can I give them the tools to make meaning, as opposed to, am I giving them tools just to master a form? And it goes back, all of this goes back to something that Larson Freeman talked about, the distinction between creativity and conformity, that languages are not about conformity, right? That we create with language. Our languages evolve, right? We don't simply conform. And so I try to go back to that creativity over conformity. So instead of just, were you able to follow all of these rules? How about, can we do something creative with the language? So let's talk a little bit about the when and how, right? And usually when we talk about output and when, the first thing we think about is novice. Ooh, novice learners, yes or no? Output, yes or no? So what I would probably say is yes, but novice learners need patience. Novice learners need guidance. We all need patience and guidance, by the way, but novice learners maybe a little extra. And so what do I mean by that? In terms of patience, this is the difference between pushed and shoved. So pushed is an achievable challenge. You have given them the tools for them to achieve this challenge, whereas shoved would be the students concluding, oh, I'm just bad at languages, and so let me ask Google to just translate all this for me, right? So that means that perhaps it was too far of a stretch for them to accomplish that challenge. And proficiency takes patience. Progress in proficiency definitely takes patience. For all of us, ask any intermediate learners, you get stuck in the intermediate range forever, what it seems like forever. It takes patience. You can't just go too fast and think that then you're speeding things up. I respect people that like the phrase leveling up. Sometimes I worry that we try to level up too fast, right? By controlling the language, and leveling up is a little bit more straightforward and tangible in video games than it is in language development. So as much as we would like to just level up, sometimes you need to stay in one level for a while. The question is, what do we count as progress? Because I do understand that learners want to see progress. We want to see progress, right? We don't want them to think that, oh, you have not advanced at all. That's a little bit depressing. So what do we count as process? How do we define progress in proficiency development? What I would say is that it doesn't always have to be about accuracy, and it doesn't always have to be about quantity. Perhaps we can think of progress in a different way. Progress could be about talking about a new topic. That's progress. Progress could be about greater fluency, being able to retrieve faster. That is progress. It could be about comprehensibility, either in whether you are able to understand them better or that they are able to understand your questions faster, right? Without having to ask for clarification multiple times. That's progress. And those are the little things of progress that sometimes we miss, or the students miss, because we are so caught up in almost achieving this perfection ideal, this accuracy, too fast. And I have to say, I mean, I'm learning Italian and I'm guilty of that. I get just so frustrated by not knowing which preposition do I need here. Did I conjugate that verb correctly? That's me. And I just have to remind myself as a learner, patience. I'm going to get there at some point, maybe. And if I don't get there, I'm okay with it. But it's just, you have to think of just the little bits of progress that you're making and making them count. Now, when we're talking about guidance, I do want to distinguish between guidance and control. Guidance is important, but I do think there's a fine line between guiding and controlling. To me, guidance means that you have created the right conditions, that you have given them the tools to achieve that challenge, but not necessarily when we get into controlling the outcome, when we have such a specific thing we want them to say or to write, and now we are controlling their language as opposed to just guiding, supporting the language. And it goes back to the distinction between output as the expression of meaning, which is what I meant as output, versus output as language practice. When we view output as language practice, that's when we get a little bit closer to controlling. Output as an expression of meaning, now we're talking a little bit about guidance, the support that we're providing. And to me, this ties very, very closely with the distinction between creativity and conformity. Expression of meaning, guidance is about creativity. How can I support you to express yourself? Versus language practice, control, conformity, right? Were you able to fit into this box that I wanted you to fit in? So guidance could be something like giving them choices, like you may give them sentence starters, but instead of forcing them to use every single one of those sentence starters, how about you let them choose? Use 3 of these, right? Something like that. Giving them useful phrases, but not necessarily forcing them to use all of them. Giving them time to prepare. That certainly counts as guidance too. Clear instructions in the sense that, oh, they know, I get it. I know what I need to do. That is also guidance. Now, control to me is when we put too many restrictions on the output to the point that it's much more about the language and checking these boxes than about the content, the expression of the meaning that I want to express. So things like, for example, answer incomplete sentences, which I understand why we do it. And I do it too in writing, right? Sometimes I push them to, can you, please write 3 complete sentences. But when you're interacting with somebody, forcing somebody to answer always incomplete sentences can be awkward and sometimes pragmatically, not accurate. We don't always answer incomplete sentences. So depending on the context, sometimes we cross into just language practice as opposed to a meaningful exchange. And then things like at least 2 irregular verbs. What if you don't need irregular verbs to say what you want to say? Different vocab words. So now if 1 or 2 verbs are really useful because we use them a lot in that language, oh, but I already used them. So now I have to think of something else because I already used that one. So now I have to, so now you see that we are giving priority to the language, to the how, as opposed to what we want to convey. So as an example, in this activity, right? So the first step, the students read a list of tips for students and indicate if the tip is specific to Spanish or other classes too. So they get some of the output, maybe modeling of what is coming later. Then the students write 4 suggestions for professors, some specific to Spanish class professors and some that are applicable to other classes or classes in general. Then the students read what they wrote and others say if it's just Spanish or all classes. And then the students rank the suggestions that apply to everybody in order of importance. So as you can say in this step 2, I gave them clear instructions and I want them to write 4 and I want them to think about maybe some for everybody, some for Spanish, but I'm not controlling. I'm not saying you need to use these vocab words and 2 need to be irregulars and you need to be, right? Express meaning with some guidance, following maybe copying some from step 1, that's okay if they're novice, but I don't want to control exactly what they're going to end up saying. So when we're talking about scaffolding, I think scaffolding needs to be much more than just language, not just how to say, but also what to say. Sometimes we forget how difficult it is to think of the content that you want to convey. It's not that you don't have the language, but sometimes it's like, no, I know, but I can't think of anything. Right? It's more of the what to say. So you need to let them brainstorm what to say as well. And you probably heard of the phrase teach to the test, right? So try to mirror instruction and assessment. Well, I would probably say the same goes for input and output. Input to the output. I think the connection between the input you provide them and the output you expect or that you would like to aim for, it needs to be there, right? And I give the example of just the vocab words of food and now write a restaurant review. Whoa, I mean, it's pretty different, right? Like maybe some vocab words will apply, but there's a whole lot more I need to write a restaurant review. And input to the output is very, very true for novice learners. They need it. They need that input to output connection very clearly. But remember, students don't stop needing input after a certain level. Even in my composition classes, and these are students that are intermediate high, let's read the types of compositions, the genre that I'm asking you to produce. In general terms for scaffolding, I would say try to start with a goal. Sometimes we forget about the goal because we're thinking too much of what it's going to look like, but try to frame the activity so there is a purpose. So start with a goal. Provide input. So think about the input that you're providing as even connected to that. Even if you did a lot of interpretive activities, do one more connected to what's coming later with the output. Brainstorm content and language. And last but not least, very important, have realistic expectations. And I'm going to go back to my horse drawing, right? So for thinking of presentational, interpersonal, it's not going to look as pretty as how well they did on the interpretive part. So this is an example from Common Ground, and I just put only the first 2 steps. But as you can see here, this is supposed to be for novice learners. So we're giving them some input with a wakes up, goes to, eats lunch. They are still creating to finish that sentence. They're also creating, they need to add one more, and then before going to bed, they need to add 2 more predictions later on. So there's still some output, but not excessive output. And then we have them create the questions in step 2 to confirm those predictions. There are more steps, but I know I'm running out of time, so I'll just I'll point out just these 2 things. And then the question that I usually get from the audience is, but wait a minute, they wrote the questions. If they write the questions, it's no longer interpersonal. No, there's no rule that if you write questions, it's no longer interpersonal. They're novice learners, so they will probably need to write the questions. They might benefit from writing the questions. And it's still a purposeful exchange of information. That's what interpersonal is all about. And you might still get negotiation of meaning, because one learner might ask, do you ride your bike? And the other one might go, what is ride your bike, right? So even if they wrote the questions, it's still interpersonal. Of course, we want them eventually, gradually, to get more comfortable with spontaneous exchanges. And this is where definitely you need patience, right? Gradually increase spontaneity. Perhaps you let them write the questions, but now put them away. Now you don't need to read them. Right? You prepared by writing the questions, but you don't read them. Maybe you tell them to ask at least 1 follow-up question. You're not controlling how many, you're not saying 1 for each item, because if they can think of anything, that's okay, but at least 1 follow-up question. And that would be on the spot, right? When the learner shares something, then they need to ask a follow-up question. So if you want more examples like this, there are plenty in Common Ground, chapters 5 and 6. So chapter 5 is all about presentational, and chapter 6 is all about interpersonal or interaction. So there's lots of examples there. And the last thing that we said, remember, is that have realistic expectations. And this goes back to what is progress for you? Now the question that I'll ask you is, what is successful for you? What do you consider successful? And in order to determine what is successful, then I think you have to consider the mode and modality. What do I mean by that? Mode, is it interpretive, presentational, interpersonal, modality, written or oral? What is successful for the proficiency level of the students and how far you're pushing them? And then what is successful for the scaffolding that you provided or that you did not? Right? Then we need to take that into account as well. To me, and I know that not everybody agrees, and that's okay. To me, successful, and I give them 100%, is at the targeted level for the given mode, modality, and task. I don't go with exceeds expectations, in the sense that if they exceed expectations, I give them a standing ovation, but I don't think it's fair to take points away from somebody who actually was able to reach the level that I was targeting. Then you're doing well, you're doing great. So I'd like to close just with a reminder of my 3 priorities and goals: proficiency over perfection, meaning making over mastering, and creativity over conformity. So thank you all very much for being here and for listening to me. And I look forward to seeing what questions you have. I shared in the link at the beginning, the link to my YouTube channel, Unpacking Language Pedagogy, where I talk about articles and activities and all kinds of fun stuff. I also have a Facebook page where I post about a lot of like upcoming webinars and things like that. And then I'm also on Twitter, tweeting about all sorts of things. You can find me on Twitter. And if you are going to tweet about this talk, please tag me. I love looking at tweets where people talk about what they learned or what they didn't like. And maybe you have questions. Tweet me the questions. Okay, I see 90 things in the chat, so I missed a lot.
Don't worry, we have been keeping track. We have been keeping track of the questions, and we will relay them to you, so you don't have to worry about that. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. That was so wonderful. If you have questions, you can continue to put them in the chat. We'll be sure to relay them and get through as many as we can in the time that we have. Before we do that, I did want to just quickly mention that we do have our exciting little surprise that we talked about at the beginning. If you wouldn't mind, Sergio, can you share your screen so that way we can...
hang on. Yeah, let me stop sharing. Sorry. There we go.
Thank you. No worries. Sergio, ¿puedes compartir tu pantalla? Gracias. All right. So we have some exciting announcements before we start our Q&A. The first is that we have a very special methodology publication being released this November, coordinated by Florencia, as well as Kim Petoskey. This publication will be a collection of articles by a variety of specialists on different aspects of language teaching and methodology. The name of this book is going to be Honing Our Craft, Current Trends in World Language Teaching and Learning, and we are so excited to be releasing this and to be working more with Florencia because she is just the best, as you guys know already. And clearly we know that every single person here is very dedicated to honing your craft, because why else would you be here in your very limited free time as teachers? And before we go ahead and get into all of our questions, everything, we want to make sure that the chat is working and you guys are all still awake and very active in the chat. So we want to ask you guys a couple of questions. So question number one, do you like Chicago? Go ahead and put in the chat. How do you feel about Chicago? Do we love it?
Do I have to answer, or wait, this is for the public?
You can feel free to answer. You are always welcome. Do you love being a lifelong learner of language? I know I personally do. It's my favorite thing about being a language learner, is it never ends. Claro, I see lots of love it. And I know this question has an obvious answer, but are you tired of boring PD, and are you looking for something engaging and applicable to your classroom that you could start implementing right away? All right, I am seeing a lot of very exuberant, exciting answers, lots of yeses.
I really hope the question, are you bored of, what is it? Are you tired of boring PD was not related to the webinar that I just gave. That's what
No, we are committed to unbelievable PD, which is why we got you here, Florencia, obviously. So I saw that a lot of people wrote yes to these questions, which is fantastic, because we are so excited to announce that in homage to our upcoming publication that we just talked about, Honing Our Craft, that will also be the title of our first annual conference happening this fall in Chicago and virtually online if you would like to attend. This conference will offer a variety of engaging sessions, including 9 workshops, 1 roundtable, and 3 plenary sessions from our expert speakers. And one of our keynote speakers is Kim Petoskey, the co-coordinator of the book that we just mentioned, Honing Our Craft, written by Kim Petoskey and Florencia and others. So this is definitely something you don't want to miss. We're so excited about it. During the conference in October, we will present the publication more in detail, so you can learn a little bit more about this book. And participants will also be receiving a sample chapter to explore and learn more about it. If you are interested in learning more about this conference and how to attend, you can look at obviously any of our social medias, and then I'm going to put it in the chat here. This website page, you can go ahead and check it out. There is all the details of how you go in, register, learn more about what we're going to be doing. And we are so excited. And I hope to see you guys there October 1st and 2nd, whether it's in person in Chicago with me, I will be there, or whether it's online virtually. We are so excited about that. So thank you so much for that. Let's go ahead and get into these questions. Question number 1 is from Lisa. Could you talk more about collaborative dialogue?
Oh my God, yes. You can read my dissertation, especially if you can't sleep one night. Yes, so that's what I did in my dissertation a lot. So Collaborative dialogue is so the students are essentially helping each other out to solve their linguistic dilemmas. And some things could be simply, you know, what is the word for this? How do you say that? And that comes up a lot when learners are working together. And sometimes it could be more like corrective feedback, if you will, right? So more of the, I think we need an accent here, or I think that this needs to be feminine, right? And so they engage in this back and forth, trying to figure out, to co-construct knowledge. That's what we mean by collaborative dialogue. It could involve more than language, but at least in SLA, a lot of the episodes that are studied are the ones where the learners turn their attention to language itself, but it could involve much more than that, right? So they could collaborate in terms of like maybe planning a story, right? Of making other decisions too.
Awesome. Someone asked, they missed the part where you described PPP. So if you could please go into detail about that, as well as if you could comment on task-based language teaching versus PPP.
Yes, I think that, I don't know if Claudia Fernandez is among our attendees tonight. I know that she's going to be at the Chicago event, and she can talk at length about TBLT, task-based. And if you ever mention PPP to Claudia Fernandez, you'll get a reaction for sure. So PPP is presentation, practice, production. Oh, Claudia is there. Oh, goodness. All right. Hi, Claudia. Am I right or am I right, Claudia, that you have a reaction every time somebody says PPP? So, okay, so PPP is how many textbooks, not everybody, but how many textbooks are still designed, especially in the grammar section, which is there is a presentation, an explanation of how that structure works, followed by controlled practice, which sometimes it could be input-based, if you want to call it that, but a lot of it gets very quickly to the, you know, fill in the blanks, change this from present to past, those kinds of drills, right? Because you want to practice the form. And then the last step is the other P, the production. And this is where some people thought, oh, here's the pushed output, right? You move too fast. And that's not what Swain meant by pushed output. So the production, then it is based on the belief that if somebody explains to you how the language works, practice, 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 now you're ready to use it. In I guess you could say it comes from a little bit of behaviorism, a little bit of just generally how we learn something, right? So if I used to be a line dance instructor, right? So how I would teach line dancing, I show you the steps, you practice them, and then we put them all together and you practice, 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 and eventually, you know, you can do the dance very, very well and fluently. I wish language worked that way, but it doesn't. And I did one time taught my students line dancing in Spanish because they wanted to, but that's a separate story. And it was comprehensible input, I would guess, but no. But no,
they're like,
so that is PPP, right? So I'm going to present, I'm going to explain it to you. We're going to practice certain steps, and then you're able to, voila, you can dance, right? And it's just, language doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Is there a strange crossover world of teachers that can line dance and also teach Spanish? Because I too line dance and teach Spanish.
Oh,
so.
Well, maybe at ACTFL, we need to get a line dancing session going on, right?
Yeah, that's perfect. I would love to hear your thoughts on online teaching and implementing meaningful oral communicative activities.
I missed the first part of the question. I'm sorry, it cut off. Can you tell me the first part?
Yes, I just said I would love to hear your thoughts on online teaching and implementing meaningful oral communicative activities.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I love online teaching, and I've done a lot of presentations on communicative activities online. I think it's going to probably be too long to explain briefly. I think that online is great to do a lot of the comprehension-based activities, because students can process things at their own pace, which sometimes in a group of 20 students is hard to tailor it, you know, to each of their speeds, so to speak. So I think online is great for that. We do have the issue of translators in online courses, which is definitely a big challenge that we are still trying to figure out how to overcome, if you will. For me, one thing that has worked really, really well is Extempore, a platform or app called Extempore, because it works the same way that a lot of exams, like the AP exams, the Apple exam, the OPIC, all of them work the same way, which is you see the prompt, but you didn't know what the question was going to be, and you need to answer spontaneously and rehearse to the best of your abilities. And of course, you can tailor the question to be as simple as you want. You can make it input based, right? So there's different things that you can do, but at least it has helped with this more of the spontaneous things, which is what we do in class in person a lot, but online it can be difficult to replicate. So Extempore has helped a lot. And then I teach college. So one thing I do, I try to incorporate in my online courses is the students interacting with speakers of the target language, in my case, Spanish, through platforms like Talk Abroad, for example. But yeah, they do need to be a little bit closer to intermediate low, they can do it. I have an article in the Language Educator coming out, the summer issue of the Language Educator, where I talk about what I do for each of the 3 modes online. So maybe that will help. And if not, the website that I shared, my site, all of my presentations are there. Some of the recordings are there, and you'll see that there's several that talk about communicative activities online.
Fantastic. Lynn asked, how is the best way to use chat sheets, very popular right now, to help students produce language using their own linguistic system versus just reading from the chat sheet? I have hesitated in using the chat sheets too much because of this.
It's a great question. Great question. I don't use them personally, so all I can give you is a bit of an estimate, if you will, of how I would envision them to be used. But I would trust if somebody here uses them in class, please share in the chat how you use them. I think that they're great for a little bit of the scaffolded input part, if you will, but that eventually you want to take that away, eventually, not right away, but eventually you will want to take that away so that the student is retrieving from their own system, as opposed to relying so much on the phrases that they have in front of them. That being said, I do think that some chat mats or chat sheets, whatever you want to call them, some of them don't have the translation. They might have a little icon to sort of remember what it is, but not all of them have the translation. And in that case, I think it's just useful support, just because we get nervous sometimes when we're interacting. And so I think that can be very good for novices. So to some extent, you're retrieving from your system, but with a lot of help. And eventually, yes, they'll get to the point where they don't need to look at it, or they don't need to have it in front of them all the time. But I do think that they can be good support at the beginning to get them to, I guess, prepare for interpersonal later on without, the anxiety that sometimes interpersonal speaking can create. They just have that support there. But if you can have the chat mats without a lot of translations, right? So they don't have everything already translated and all they're doing is searching for the English, right? It's almost like the same as asking Google Translate for everything, then better, right? At least get them to invest some cognitive effort to try to find the right words, if you will.
Can you explain what chat sheets are for people who've never used them?
Yes, I'm not the creator of it. Let's just clarify that. Amy Leonard has some wonderful chat mats that you can find online. Can I search real quick and maybe share the link so that people can see it right away and they don't have to listen to me?
That would be fantastic.
Very poorly. So it is essentially, I'm going to share. So here's what I'll do, but I don't want anybody to think that I'm like getting any money from this. So this is a Teachers Pay Teachers link, but you don't have to buy anything. You can just look at the previews, right, at the images, so that you understand. And you'll see that one of them says Amy's Chat Mats. So if you click on that, you'll see what we mean by chat mats. It is a bit of a cheat sheet, if you will, thematic. And so the learners have these useful phrases, some of them with translations, some of them with icons, right? They're meant to be communicative support, I would call it, right? So it is nice because it is more thematic and it is more about the type of language that they would likely need. But of course, you know your learners, right? So if you feel like there's a different type of cheat sheet or chat mat that you would create for your students because you know the types of things that they do. College students might, need something a little bit different. Then yeah, you would need to tailor them a little bit. But at least just to give you an example of what it is for people who have never heard of chat mats before. And yes, Amy does have some things shared for free as well.
Great. Not a question, but I really appreciate the slide about progress. I think it's important not just to measure quantitatively, like word count or accuracy, but these other factors like greater complexity or a new topic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, I agree.
What is your opinion on TPRS, reading and storytelling? Is TPRS alone with pop-up grammar and story retells from students an effective method in your opinion?
Somebody wants to get me in trouble. It's not for me. I'm just going to say that. It's not for me. I don't see myself doing that. And I feel like if it is what I'm picturing, which is the very specific way of doing TPRS, which there's like certain progression and certain things you do, and you do them in a certain way. To me, it gets too much into labels over principles, and I'm much more about principles over labels. So I don't want to be in one little box where I'm supposed to be doing this, and this is it, and this is the best way to do it. So for me, I don't like telling stories or constructing stories with the students. It's just not me. It doesn't feel real to me. You know what I mean? And so it would be really awkward for me to do it in class. It just doesn't work for me. I do think, of course, there's a lot of value in reading. Yes, by all means, reading, wonderful for language development. No, I don't think anybody would dispute that. I think it's great if the students are into creating stories and that's what you do with them and it works for you. That's great. You have to go back to principles and then also consider your context, right? And what's going to work the best for you. I'm just not, even TBLT, and Claudia loves TBLT and I love her for that. But to me, it's like sometimes it's a little bit too, I need to be in this box where I'm like, no, what if I do something else that is not technically a task, but it still works for me. So I just, and to me, it just goes back to, are learners engaging meaningfully and purposefully with the language? If the answer is yes, and you want to call it TBLT, TPRS, whatever you want to call it, beautiful.
Great. In terms of guidance, how do you assess or provide feedback without getting into perfectionist thinking?
Oh, that's hard, isn't it? Oh my God.
That's a good question.
I struggle with that. That is a great question. So what I would probably say is it's going to depend a lot on the context, but if we're thinking of, let's distinguish very quickly between oral interaction and written production, right? For oral interactions, I cannot even remember the last time I gave an explicit correction. I might do a recast, which means that I correct, if you will, or reformulate. I like that word. Reformulate what the learner said and keep going with the conversation. And sometimes I do it without even noticing that I'm doing it. So it's not a very obvious recast, like, I want to correct you now. It's not that. I just do it without even thinking about it. And one of the students in my methods course said, you recasted me one time, and I laughed out loud. Like, she noticed the recast. I didn't even mean it as a recast. So that I do. And to me, it's like, you notice, great. You don't, let's keep going. Let's keep going, communicating. Maybe you're not ready to notice yet, and that's okay. And then we keep going. If they initiate it, if it's learner initiated attention to form and they want to know, of course, I help them. I'm not going to say, oh, no, don't worry, keep saying it wrong, it's fine. I'm not going to say that. Of course you want to help them if it's coming from them. Now, written production is probably where we're very tempted to want to edit things, and I understand why. And also the learner has more time to look at their production and the correction and notice things. I get all that, but I think that we do have to go back to a little bit of that trade-off of potential side effects of too many corrections and the benefits that we might get from corrective feedback. And there are different views on corrective feedback. I did a video on a particular article from Charlene Polio, who was in my dissertation committee, by the way, wonderful scholar for second language writing. And she essentially looked at different theories of SLA and how they view the value of feedback, and then try to reconcile that with some of the results that we get from research on corrective feedback on writing. And I like it because she concludes the article with certain conditions that need to be met for feedback to be effective. So if you have time to watch that video, I recommend that you do, and I think it will give you some food for thought. So one of the conditions is that the feedback needs to be immediately used for something, and that immediately used, it could be vague, but at the very least, it needs to be used for something. So if it's just you're correcting it for them to take a look at it and toss it, it's probably not worth your time. That's what I would probably do. I would probably say, unless it makes you feel better, unless it's something you have to do to not get fired, okay. But if you're expecting that to have a big impact on their language development, you're going to be disappointed. What I worry is that it's going to have an effect on them wanting to be extra careful about what they say, not wanting to take risks anymore. And now we created a problem rather than providing solutions. And then the other thing, which is what makes feedback so tricky to be effective, is that it has to be at the right level for each and every student. And how do you know what each student is ready to notice and ready to acquire? Is almost impossible for you to know, and you shouldn't even try to know that. And so this is why feedback is a little bit of this hit or miss, right? That for some students it seems to click, and for others it doesn't seem to click. For some structures it seems to click, and for some structures it doesn't seem to click. And so you have to think about, at the end of the day, what effect are you expecting feedback to have, and then whether there could be other side effects of it, which are also documented in research, which is, students taking fewer risks, writing less, right? There could be other things that come with too many corrections. So what I try to do is I try to focus on at level and for the task and modality. And then comprehensibility is something that I always put, just because I want my learners to be understood, but comprehensibility for the proficiency level of the student, the proficiency level that I'm targeting. So when I don't understand something, or what I'm in between, I think you mean this, but I'm not sure if you mean that, that's the kind of feedback that I provide. And then tell me what you meant. Let's have a little dialogue on what did you mean here, right? But ideally what you would like to do is for that to be revised and reused again. So not just a one and done, here's the feedback, let's move on, but you have to do something with it, whether they revise and resubmit, whether later on you're going to be revisiting that and expanding that based on more things they now know, right? So ideally, when you're giving that feedback, is because they're going to come back to it, if you will.
Thank you. That was a great answer to a great question. What is your opinion?
I feel like I got an A. Woo!
Yeah, there you go. Definitely. What is your opinion of the readers? When should they be introduced? I found some that they follow the TPRS format.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the readers, I'm not sure that I have a clear answer of when they should be introduced. I mean, probably when they have enough language to understand most of it, I would say. It's just going to depend on the reader, right? Some readers are for different levels, so not all readers are the same. What I would say in general, though, is for you to take a look at the reader yourself, because your students, not just in terms of the language, but also in terms of the content, the ideas that the readers might be conveying, which sometimes, just like any book out there, you might read a book and think this is not good for my students to read on their own, and then think that this is the right way of viewing the world. Okay, so choose something else, right? So think critically of the materials. I do that with anything, not just with readers, right? With any other resource that I'm bringing, I need to think of, what message is it conveying, who's represented, who's not. I mean, there's so many things that you need to keep in mind. But I think I don't have any problem with them, and I think that they can be a good way for the students to feel like they can do something, they can read, and some of them, they might like the storyline, so nothing wrong with that. But again, just think carefully of the content of the reading itself, and whether there could be some problematic ideologies or anything like that. And that goes for anything, infographics. I mean, there's so many everything that you bring, you think that you need to think about those things.
What are your thoughts about control and creativity in assessment?
In assessment? Was that, I missed the last word, I'm sorry.
Yes, assessment.
Oh, yes, creativity in assessment. I love it. Why not? And creativity doesn't have to be fiction, right? Like let's differentiate that. It's not like you have to come up with a novel. It doesn't have to be that. Just what I mean is like just expressing meaning. Meaning making to me is creating with language. And so for example, one of the things I do is in oral interview with me, and it could be because I'm OPI certified and I like that kind of stuff, but I think it's just great to have a conversation with them. I can adjust the level of my questions based on how they're doing. And then they tell me things, I get to know them. They ask me questions, they get to know me, we laugh. That's creativity in assessment, right? I'm not controlling. I'm not seeing, did you remember this word? Did you remember this? Did you conjugate that verb? It's not that. If they don't remember the word, I'm like, describe it. Give me an example. I even kind of coach them to be like doing very, very basic circumlocution. Great. You still get, I understood what you meant. You still get credit. It's not about, but you didn't remember the word from chapter 3. That I don't like grading them that way. That is conformity, right? I'm assessing memorization skills. And what I like to believe is I'm giving them the tools. So it's not like they don't know any of the words and they're out there, trying to figure it out by themselves. I'm giving them the tools, but it could happen that you don't remember a word. Find another way of saying it. That is language. That's how language works. So that is still successful communication.
Absolutely. Ryan asked, could you mention a few methods you employ to measure proficiency benchmarks in the interpersonal mode? And what do you think about their proficiency being measured by a letter grade?
Oh, I don't like grades. If I could get rid of grades altogether, I would. It's so much more fun to teach without grades. I've done it, members of the community who just want to learn Spanish. There's no grades and it's so much fun. I don't live in that world. My university requires me to give letter grades. My university requires me to disclose how they're going to be graded. I mean, all of that. I mean, I'm tied to that. I'm still exploring. I'm willing to explore possibilities. So even within my system, could I find ways of not be so tied to grades? The only compromise that I have found at this point, but I'm not done learning, is to be a little bit more proficiency focused, but not necessarily full-on IPA rubrics that to me get a little bit too complex. No, IPAs are good. I'm not saying that, but just the rubrics to me are a little bit too much. And so I create more of like simplified, minimalistic rubrics where I think about what am I looking for? What are my values? What am I really hoping that they will be able to do? And so, for example, with the novice high students, The text type, so the type of language that they're giving me is a mixture of some sentences and some fragments and some words. Okay, they're at level. So I have to keep reminding myself, are they at level? And then comprehensibility. Am I going to have to ask for clarification a few times? Yes. That's novice high. You are at level. So it's almost like you have to change the way you're thinking or that you're seeing proficiency. I was still probably have a little bit of that conditioned of it from traditional teaching of, oh, that wasn't a complete sentence. Oh, that was a wrong word. Oh, that didn't conjugate the verb. I mean, you still notice those things, you do, but I push them like, novice high, novice high. You know what I mean? Like, just don't tell me that they're novice high, they're at level, right? So it has helped a lot to be OPI certified, to continue, not just the training. The training is fantastic if you can do it. It's expensive, 4 days, go for it. But just being an actual rater, just have that continuous reminder of what am I looking at? What am I looking at? What am I looking at? It does help a lot. I don't know that, did I answer the question? There was a question about, like, maybe somebody asked about the rubric. Was that it? I can share with you the rubric that I use. I'm not saying it's perfect. It's the best that I could, tweak it after a while. And I'm happy to share the rubric that I use for interpersonal, which is the little interview they do with me, which is a pretty short interview. And the level that I'm targeting is intermediate low. Hang on, let me see if I can find it. Give you 1 minute.
While Florencia is looking for that, I just want to quickly mention, like I always told my students, mistakes are good because mistakes means that you are learning. So I apologize for the mistake with our registration form, but the links should be active now and ready to go in regards to the conference. Kamala has put them a few times in the chat. We'll be sure to link them again before you guys go. We also are going to be sending out the video for this webinar, as well as the PowerPoint slides and a survey, which it would mean the absolute world to us. It's how we get better with every PD that we provide to you and keep making functional things for you to attend and make worthwhile for you. So if you could please make sure to fill those out, we would appreciate it so much. Awesome.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it and
no worries.
My Google Drive is not helping me. I know that I have the link in one of my presentations on interpersonal speaking. I'm going to my own site and trying to find things. Let's see.
We could also include it with our email that we send out that will have the PowerPoint slides and the.
There we go. Full rubric here. Here we go.
Oh, perfect. There we go.
But it is there if you want to see that. So that's the link to the rubric. And again, I was targeting intermediate low. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but for a lot of the students that they are at level is giving them 100%. And that's what I was, aiming for. Now, whether it needs a little bit more of calibration and figuring out how fair it is to the novice high students, it's a valid criticism and question and challenge, and something that I would need to think about more. But as you know, a rubric is like a house. You're never done adding to and tweaking it. It's just
so true.
Never done. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I know unfortunately we weren't able to get to all the questions, but we do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We do also want to say we're apologizing that we weren't able to get the closed captioning working. We tried to activate them during the session, but it wasn't able to do so. But we promise we will be putting the video up on YouTube, and YouTube will provide the captions automatically. So if there was anything that you missed during the presentation, you will be able to follow up with that. But otherwise, 1,000 thanks. Mil gracias so much. Thank you, Florencia, for this amazing presentation, and for all of you for attending and taking the time to be here with us today. From all of us at Clet World Languages, have a great evening and thank you.